Hello and welcome to another episode of With Enough Prep Time. I'm going to give you plenty of content regarding my views in the next few weeks. So I'm going to continue a part two to my discussion of whether Superman could be cast as black. Like, for instance, very recently they wanted to do Michael B. Jordan. And I'm also going to kind of further discuss, in general, race bending in Hollywood and the kind of politics of race bending in Hollywood. So the first thing I want to do, because it's something that I didn't do in the first video, which I think is important, is actually lay out the argument that is made by the other side as to why Superman can be black. And the argument goes something like this. Superman's an alien. Aliens aren't white. He's not even white, really, when you're technically speaking, even in the comics, because he's an alien. So aliens can be black, white. They shouldn't even really look human, so he can be black, white, or anything. It doesn't make a difference whether he's white. And or that there needs to be kind of more representation. Why can't a black kid go to the cinema and look to the cinema and see themselves in the characters? Now, I particularly dislike the second argument, because I think they use black people who, I believe, you ask 90% of black people who maybe don't live in Hollywood or something like that, whether they'd want to see a black Superman or a black Batman, they would tell you no, because that's it. Instinctively, even though they don't critically think of it like I do, instinctively it doesn't make sense. Now, I've laid out an argument in my last video, which please go and watch, like, subscribe, comment, as to why I don't think Superman being black really makes sense. I think if you want to race bend a character, and I'm going to go on to my general view of race bending in general, but if you want to race bend a character, the very, very least you can do is ensure that race bending that character doesn't distract from what you're watching, and B, doesn't fundamentally change the character. And what I was saying is that race bending Superman, for it to really make sense, requires for you to change the character, or to mitigate the change by addressing the history of the character in a way that it's either distracting or it doesn't make sense. I.e., you could do one thing is, he's an alien, so aliens can be any color, so let's shoot a black kid down to the Kents. So do we keep the Kents white? So it's now they're adopting a black kid, which I'm sure the Kents would, because they're very nice people, but I'm sure they wouldn't care about race at all. But it's a good Elseworld story. That I'd love to see an Elseworld story where, like, the Kents come across a black kid and how it would have changed things for them and changed things for Superman. But in terms of a main continuity, or in a film where in a world where you haven't got Superman right up until now, in a modern kind of, in the age of CGI, they got Superman right in the 70s, but for a lot of kids, they can't watch those films because the special effects just aren't up to the standard where they can really kind of immerse themselves in the film. Whereas in the age of CGI, you've had stuff like Man of Steel, and you've had Superman Returns, which just really hasn't captured the heart of the character, in my opinion, and what's special about that character. So, and I'll discuss that in a future video. So, I would love to see an Elseworld tale of Superman where he's black. Absolutely wouldn't mind that. But you have to establish the character of Superman for the modern age. Every time there's a new leap in technology, of how you can represent in film a story, you have to update your update the mythos of a particular character. So in the age before CGI, you had a perfectly good Superman, you had a perfectly good Batman. In the post CGI age, now you have a good Batman, you have a good representation of Batman. So now you can fuck with Batman a little bit. You can mess around with the character and do kind of strange things because people know, fundamentally who Batman is supposed to be, with a few exceptions, right? With Superman, that's more on shaky ground because a lot of kids would just not have watched the early Superman movies. So you have to establish a Superman that represents the character properly, so that he isn't, like the mythos isn't just kind of forgotten and people don't just think it's antiquated, because people will think it's antiquated if they associate it with the Christopher Reeves Superman. Because they're not associating it with Man of Steel because they think it sucks. They're not associating it with Superman Returns because they don't think it's that good. Or at least Man of Steel has divided fans. So that's not a good representation, right? If it's dividing Superman fans, it's not a good representation, because you need Superman fans to galvanize people so that they can say, oh, this is our guy, this is, you've got to watch this film, you've got to, and get people enthusiastically excited about Superman who otherwise wouldn't. That's how the mythology of that character carries on into the future. If you've got one Superman guy going, oh no, this is the worst representation of Superman ever, and another one saying, oh no, this is the greatest, it's a masterpiece, people are just going to be like, oh, whatever. They're either going to like the movie or not, and they're not really going to like, it's not going to capture hold of the imaginations of people the same way as if people were unified on, like, whoa, like Nolan, like the Nolan movies or the Tim Burton movies, or the Superman from the 70s. That unified people, so everyone was behind those characters. Or Iron Man, everyone loves the Iron Man movies, even though the Wonder Woman movie recently. So Elseworlds about a black Superman would be fine, if perhaps in the future, if there's a really, really good take on it, I would probably support it once you establish the character first properly in the mainstream consciousness. So away from that, now what I was saying about the importance of or what I was saying against the arguments of it taking you out of the movie was, I think it's essential to the Superman character to be from Kansas. As I said, in a future Elseworld, sure, he could be from Detroit, and see where that what that plays out as. That would be very interesting. The Kents are black. A black kid lands in Detroit. He ends up being Superman. That would be a really interesting take. They call him Clark Kent. Everything's the same. It's just that they're black and they represent the core values of Black America or something like that. That would be a fantastic movie. I'd love that. Or an Asian or any other kind of variation of that kind of story. But in terms of setting up the iconic Superman, I think that's problematic, and I think most black people would agree that and don't want to be used as a shield in irrational arguments that suggest, oh, let's just make Superman Michael B. Jordan. Even Michael B. Jordan, you could see he was uncomfortable with the idea of being Superman. He thought it was the notion of having a Superman now when you haven't established the character in the mainstream consciousness as Michael B. Jordan. He knows it would be ridiculous. He knows it. He couldn't. There's not a black actor good enough. There's black actors who would do a superb job, but they still just it wouldn't work. Right? It would be too distracting. And as I said, as soon as you change you either do it so it's distracting, where it's like a black kid, suddenly the Kents are white adopting a black kid, and that's kind of distracting because you're like, questions would arise from their family, from other things. Where did you get this black kid? Did you just kidnap him from the neighborhood? Or what the hell happened with this black kid all of a sudden? There's less questions, obviously, if Clark is white. Or you can have a black family in Kansas, which is like, what are the odds of a black alien landing in one of the only black families in Kansas who are farmers? Very, very unlikely. Or, the last kind of option you might want to take is to take him away from that Kansas, and he's raised somewhere else. So it's a black alien that lands somewhere else in America where it's more populated by black people, and then you have the kind of issue that, as I said, arises that, one, you're fundamentally changing the ground of the Superman character, and then secondly, in terms of the power of his mythology, which is he is the only thing that makes him good. Is that he was born or he was raised by this Kent family. If he had been raised anywhere else by any other family, it could have been very, very dangerous. So the power is that is where his goodness derives from. So him caring about everyone, the homeless man on the street, and all of this kind of thing, should only come from there. It shouldn't come from, oh, Superman's black, so he knows what discrimination is like, and therefore these good acts come from a kind of empathy that he gains from somewhere that's ultimately self-involved, as opposed to or egocentric, as opposed to just purely knowing that it's right from wrong, having that kind of innate sense of morality that's instilled in him by Parr and Marquette. So that's my opinion on Superman anyway. And I don't like the kind of politics where they kind of shield themselves in Hollywood, behind casting ethnic minorities by saying, well, we need more representation, and therefore James Bond or any of these characters can be black or Asian, and forget if it fundamentally kind of changes the character. We don't care because kids need people to look up to. So on that sense, what I really think is they should really attack that with actually doing the hard groundwork of creating more iconic black characters. And it kind of makes it hard for me to think they're taking this kind of ideology of creating heroes for black kids very seriously, or creating heroes for Asian kids very seriously, when 9 out of 10 brand new franchises, like say for instance the franchise John Wick, that could have been a black person, right? That could have been an Asian person. That didn't have to be Keanu Reeves. They made that Keanu Reeves. That franchise, which is now very popular, could have been, an Asian guy. They could have given that to Tony Jaa. It would have made no difference. And then you would have something, in 10 years from now, they might recast, that mythology might grow, and they might recast somebody, so that they can make a new franchise out of, the same way they're doing with Matrix. Neo could have been black, didn't have to be white. So that's my point there, that they should focus more on creating these new characters. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the fact that they were white, but I'm just saying I find it hard to believe that they care so much in Hollywood about this kind of representation, when every new character, which absolutely could have been a different race, Asian, Indian, whatever, they make into white guys. So why would you then be like, oh no, we've got to turn Superman black? He's with the Flash and Batman, they've got to be black. But new films coming out. Oh right, John Wick. Oh yeah, we're gonna cast a white guy. Definitely a white guy. Makes no sense. right? Like, why not use those characters? And they've become relatively, big franchises in and of themselves. Now, what I would say, though, however, is on the other side, there's a very, very hard line. Absolutely never. We cannot race bend or gender bend or anything characters. Now, for me, James Bond can't be black. I'm gonna put it very simply. James Bond can't be black. Why can't James Bond be black? First of all, it doesn't add to his character to make him black. It detracts from his character. I don't think it makes the character more interesting, and it makes it more illogical. Why? Why do I say it makes it more illogical? Because unfortunately, in this world, in a world of espionage where somebody has to blend in into the higher echelons of society, having a black guy is going to make them stand out a lot more than James Bond. Now, I'm not saying there cannot be black espionage, spy kind of people, right? But some of the kind of areas that James Bond walks into, I just don't think. I think there'd be more focus on the fact that he's black than anything else. And I just think he stands for all this kind of colonial, old British Empire virtues and values anyway, which I don't want a black person to do. I'm perfectly fine with a white person doing it. Same with Bruce Wayne, comes from old money. It's very, very unrealistic to think of old money coming from a black family when historically you had like slavery in America, and blacks weren't allowed to own property and all of this kind of stuff. There probably was some kind, one or two, a handful of black families that have some kind of old money, but it's very, very few and far between. So Bruce Wayne coming from that kind of background would be very, very distracting. So I think, again, it's about taking it on a case-by-case basis. So with those characters, doesn't make sense. Superman doesn't make sense. With Captain America, it doesn't make sense. You can maybe make a different Captain America, extend the mythology, but the original Captain America, who is in World War II. Actually, Captain America is a bit, shaky, but I think in general, Captain America should be white. But the original one that comes from World War II, from Brooklyn, and was a small guy and, is juiced up, that guy has to be white, in my opinion. Okay. But does this apply to every character? What happens to those characters where, these kind of vocal people, minorities there, or vocal kind of people who are against race bending anywhere, are very vocal in a particular way, and they use particular arguments. And one of their favorite arguments is like, what would you do if they made Black Panther a white person? What would you do? It's like, you wouldn't want that, so why would you want to make this white character, a black person? And the simple reason is that because of representation, you don't need to change any more black characters into white characters, because there's enough representation of white. So you don't need to change any Asian characters into black characters, because there's enough representation of whites. The reason that one might want to change a white character into a black character is to give black actors more jobs, since 20 out of 20 jobs in Hollywood go to, in terms of actors and in terms of leading roles, go to white people, to give more equality, more representation on screen, all of that good stuff. So, for instance, they would say, oh, you can't turn Magneto into a black guy. Now, for me, Magneto is the perfect example of a character that definitely there's no problem with race bending him. I think, in fact, it might even help the character. So this is why I wanted to give the example between Superman and between another character where it does make sense. Like there's Supermans and James Bonds and Batmans over on this side, and then there's characters like Magneto, or even someone as iconic, dare I say, as the Joker, I think all hell would break loose if they cast the Joker as black. But I ask you, why? What about the Joker? What would change fundamentally about the character of the Joker if he was black? Or if he was Asian? I say nothing. He doesn't even have a name or a history in some cases. So it doesn't matter where he's from. And if a black actor is capable of doing that kind of performance, a Heath Ledger level performance, which I'm sure there are black actors who could, or Asian actors who could, or, what difference does it make? I say the Joker could be any color, and it would be great. Or Riddler, or any of a number of Batman villains, for instance, and it might even improve on the character in a bit in some ways, because you can now look at the class divisions, for instance, between Batman and the Joker, and that could be starkly highlighted by the Joker taking on the Batman from privilege and class taking on this black Joker, who may be from the ghetto and is raised there, but is just this criminal mastermind. So I think there's virtue to be had in casting the Joker as black. But I wanted to talk about Magneto for a second, because Magneto is a very, very important case of this particular scenario, because he's based himself on Malcolm X. Stan Lee has admitted it just as much, that Malcolm X was the civil rights movement guy in America, part of the Nation of Islam, who was for a kind of separatist movement where he wanted blacks and whites to segregate from each other, because he didn't think that they could live with each other, because white people were just too racist, apparently, according to him. And Malcolm X was Professor X. So again, I just don't see what fundamentally changes about Magneto if you make him black. For one, if you want to do a modern film of the X-Men, it improves him being by him being black, because what is Magneto's story? The essential origin story is usually set in World War II in the concentration camps, right? And he's a Jew, and he sees the horrors of the Holocaust, and it means to him he takes on this very kind of realpolitik kind of view of the world, and that it's us against them kind of thing, right? If you let the powerful take control of those that they fear, they will ultimately try and eliminate them. So the best way is to just fight back in a militant manner, right? But World War II is a long, long time ago now. And if you want to update the mythology, it's going to make less and less sense that Magneto was part of this concentration camps in World War II. So you've got to update it where maybe he was born in the 60s, or maybe he was part of a different struggle in the 80s, for rights somewhere else, right? So this gives a really good opportunity to make him Indian, or to make him Asian, or to make him, black, and have a different, something different from the Holocaust being the reason that he gets this kind of perception of reality and the mutant problem. And I think that's a really, really novel and organic, interesting way to take the character. So this again is where I say this kind of black and white thinking of it has to be this way or it has to be that way, right, is ruinous, I think, to a lot of the community of comic book fans, because they don't think outside the box. They're just like, no, and this character was white, he can never ever be black. And the hypocrisy of it as well is that actually there have been those who say that once a character is white, he should never be changed, whatever. The hypocrisy of it is they do change ethnic minority characters or non-kind of white characters in film. For instance, I've never heard anybody mention that that Tom Hardy was cast as Bane, who was in the comics a Latino character, yeah, a Latin American character, right? And he was changed to Tom Hardy. You know, that's a job that really should have gone to a Latin American actor, which there are far less of in Hollywood. But I don't mind that change because I don't think being Latin American is really essential to the Bane character. So it didn't really matter that much that the Bane character was changed. And I think it's easier to race bend villains as well, because I think messing with a villain's origin is not as heinous as messing with the hero's origin, which is a video I will discuss, because I really think that is a problem. You can mess with where Lex Luthor comes from, right? Did he meet Clark Kent in Smallville? Did he meet Clark Kent in Metropolis? What's, you know, his motivations and all of that? You can do a lot more with that and mess with that a lot more than messing with Superman's origin. Once you say Krypton didn't blow up, you know, forget about it for me. I'm out, right? Krypton survived and they're in a civil war. That's why they sent, you know, Kal-El to Earth. Bullshit, you know. Or Batman's parents, you know, only his mum was killed, and his dad trained him, not Alfred. I'm out, right? But the Joker having several origins, being from this place or that place, or this, falling in a vat, or he didn't fall in a vat, that is more organic, and it depends on the story that they're telling about Batman, right? So I think, you know, in terms of villains, that's where race bending often makes a lot more sense than with heroes. Heroes, it becomes a little bit more difficult, because they're so a lot of what's essential to those characters is their origin, and if their origin is very much kind of if being white is very, very much part of that origin, and it's hard to decouple that, then it can become distracting or confusing, or, you know, unnecessarily. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to my video on whether Superman can be white and my discussion. Please like, subscribe, tell me what you think. Do you think Superman can be white? Do you think Magneto can be black? What are your thoughts on race bending within Hollywood? I'd love to hear it. This is with enough prep time, and I'm the